Hey, Mark, you and I are in. I don't see anybody else. I'm sure they're all having the same problem. You're on mute, Mark.
Sorry, Dave. Yeah,
Just
Les is there.
just hang on for 1 minute. We're just getting things going. Let me,
I don't know who Henry is.
Hello.
well, hi.
Anyone else?
There should be lots waiting.
Well, I think I have video, but I don't know how to get audio here. Oh, here we go.
All right. Well,
Okay.
we've just got some technical issues. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes.
David, who's Henry? Henry's
Yeah,
icon.
he shouldn't
I
he shouldn't be
can't.
there.
I can't see my face.
I have no idea, and we shouldn't be hearing anyone other than those of us on the panel.
Yeah, so he was made a panelist. He probably shouldn't be a panelist.
Yeah, I got him out.
Okay.
Who are we missing here?
Shy and John Allen.
There's Shy. John. Okay.
There we go. I think we have everyone now, David.
Okay.
Um, all right.
Just the mutes, I guess.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We are ready to get going now. We are going to have an interesting discussion today, and I'm glad you're all here. I'm going to hand it over right away to David DeWitt to make the introductions and get us going.
Great. Thanks, Les. And again, apologies for the delay. So it's a real pleasure to be joined by Mark Heller. He's been with us before, a few years ago. And today he's going to be addressing something that I think is on the minds of everyone. Israel's changing political culture and its implications. I think it's its implications domestically in terms of its history as an evolving liberal democracy, implications in international affairs, its relationship with the United States in particular, but also, of course, regionally. Mark is an emeritus senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies uh, in Tel Aviv. And he has a long history with that institution. In its earliest days, it was called the Center for Strategic Studies, and then the Jaffe Center for Strategic Studies, and then became the INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies. And throughout his career, he was a senior researcher there, also had an affiliation to teaching at Tel Aviv University in the political science department. Mark has been a visiting scholar at a number of institutions in North America, including the University of California at San Diego and Cornell and Harvard, where he did his PhD after he did his undergraduate work at the University of Toronto. And Mark was also, for a year or two, the coordinator of research at what was then the Canadian Institute for International Peace and Security, an important short-term effort to create research capacity and independent voice as a think tank in Canada, which unfortunately then was closed down by the government. Uh, Mark has written extensively on a range of topics, and I think for many of you who would otherwise not be aware, two of his most interesting books are were A Palestinian State, The Implications for Israel, very early on in that discussion, and No Trumpets, No Drums, a two-state settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that he co-authored with a very senior and important Palestinian scholar and politician, Sari Nusseibeh. Mark has written a number of other books, including Dynamics of Soviet Policy in the Middle East, Continuity and Change in Israel's Security Policy, which came out in the very significant series called the Adelphi Papers, which comes out of the International Institute of Strategic Studies in London. So, with that, it's a real pleasure to welcome you, Mark, as an old friend and colleague and a former resident of Toronto. Uh, Good to have you with us today, and the screen is yours.
Well, thank you, David. I'm very happy to join you to see some old friends, to see some new friends, and have a chance to exchange some ideas with people who have, I believe, important insights on the issues on the agenda. Now, of course, I have to begin, as most people do, with disclosure. Maybe not full disclosure, but a disclosure. Like most people, I get my information from a lot of different sources, but I have to confess that the bulk of it comes from three places: Haaretz, the New York Times, and Channel 12, Israel television. What that means is, I think, that I may know a fair bit about what's going on, but I'm not sure I really know a lot about what most or many people think in Israel about what's going on, because those are, I guess, minority media with a particular slant. And therefore, everything I suggest or propose ought to be taken with a large grain of salt. Well, my sense is that what many, if not most people, are thinking these days about what's going on in Israel is an indication of a trend towards what seems to be emerging illiberal democracy. That is to say, a response to populism, which is often incarnated in the right, what's called the right wing, although I'm not sure the terminology is really appropriate, because the divisions of opinion are not the classical left-right divisions about economic policies, social welfare policies, distribution, and so forth. They're more about issues of the purpose of government, how it's constituted. And what I mean by drift away from classic liberal democracy is that I mean a strengthening in recent years of, as I said in this paper I wrote several years ago, a strengthening of traditionalist and conservative forces inclined to interpret democracy as little more than the will of the majority, and intent on whittling away at the cultural and institutional obstacles to the majority's unfettered rule. Such obstacles include separation of powers, especially an independent judiciary, the rule of law, and the protection of basic liberties of speech, assembly, religion, and property, as well as independent, which is to say critical, mass media. All of this underpinned by tolerance, if not respect, for minority cultures, interests, and opinions, and for the individual rights and liberties of citizens. These features are what I call the hardware and software of liberal democracy, and if they are undermined, even as the consequence of the outcome of technically free elections, the result will be illiberal democracy, or sometimes referred to as majoritarian authoritarianism. Now, this is not new. I was quoting from a paper that I wrote, published in 2019, when all of these trends were emerging already and seemed quite apparent, at least to me. And all I think I can really say with some conviction is that trends have been intensified in recent years, especially since October 7th. Now, I was struck last week by an interview that Channel 12 did with about a dozen first-time voters, kids somewhere between the age of 18 to 21 who hadn't voted before, and they were asked what their preferences were with respect to personalities, parties, and policies. And what was quite clear to me from that admittedly not necessarily representative sample is that there has been since 2023, October 7th, a rightward shift in many respects. 11 out of the 12 interviewees indicated that they were more right-wing, more authoritarian, less liberally inclined, less tolerant of divergent opinion than their parents were or are. The younger generation is in many respects much more right-wing than the older generation. One of the kids, in fact, said, kind of summarized the differences, saying that his parents' generation used to sing Shel Shalom, the peace song, and his generation just sings Harbu Darbu, which means let's go get them, join up the combat forces, and go all out. Now, at first glance, it strikes me as a kind of anomalous reaction to what happened in 2023. Normally, when governments fail, they're held responsible for their failure. And the opposition is rewarded with at least an opportunity to do something differently. But so far, the evidence seems to be that the government has been strengthened, at least the ideas underlying the government have been strengthened, and the opposition is struggling to survive and find its feet and pose an acceptable opposition or alternative. Now, I'm not sure really that I understand the explanation for this. Some people suggest that, as in all stressful situations of conflict with external enemies, there is a natural tendency to push for unity, and the government, or at least the spokesman of the government, have somehow successfully weaponized the idea of national unity to hint and sometimes to explicitly suggest that those who oppose government policies are, in fact, aiding the enemy. Now, in fact, the result has been, to some extent, a legitimization of what was previously illegitimate political discourse. That is to say, the attempt to equate opposition with treason. It resonates in certain audiences. Now, again, what's happening here in Israel is not unique to Israel. Speaking of the New York Times, some of you have probably saw yesterday there was an op-ed article by Chrystia Freeland talking about the end of capitulation to right-wing populism, which she and many others have identified as a rising sentiment in the Western world over the last couple of years, which is explained by the ability of those forces to blame the discontent or the grievances of people on easy targets. Easy targets being either, as she put it, the elites, unelected elites, foreign countries, or immigrants. And that is the kind of the appeal to reverse what those alien forces have been able to do is the basis for what these right-wing populist movements suggest or propose. In some cases, they're even identified as, well, not to put too fine a point on it, as proto-fascist movements, which some wits have described as the counter-revolution against a revolution that never happened. In other words, the reaction against what people perceive as hidden forces, evil forces, the deep state, unidentified and unaccountable forces who are responsible for all the grievances and dissatisfactions that people naturally feel. And that includes, as I think one of the most serious threats to the vibrancy of democracy, a counter-revolution against what is sometimes described as a judicial revolution. In Israel, at least, it's a very common theme, although nobody is ever actually able to provide any evidence for the revolution in judicial matters that ostensibly took place, but it's proposed as a solution to the problem of unaccountable and unelected judicial authorities imposing themselves over elected governments and popular will. In fact, in some cases, it has reached the absurd point, in my view, the absurd point of attributing all kinds of problems to occult forces that nobody can really identify. Now, even this sample of kids, dozen kids who were interviewed, they seem to reflect what some opinion analysts suggest is 30 to 40% of the population in Israel who are convinced that there were occult forces inside Israel, not in the government, of course, but in the army, in the security forces, who knows where else, who were clandestinely helping Hamas to pull off what it pulled off on October 7th. Like the judicial revolution, these beliefs too in the so-called deep state are never actually put to the test of empirical evidence, but they are widely held. I think, however, what is perhaps unique about Israel, and we know these things are prevalent all over the Western world, the United States and Western Europe and elsewhere. I think what's unique in Israel is that nobody blames the immigrants. And nobody even really blames, or at least identifies, foreign countries. So the target of the dissatisfaction in Israel instead is terrorists, which is a kind of a indirect way of referring to Palestinians. And they become the focus of grievance and discontent, and the explanation for the dissatisfaction that many people feel, sometimes subjectively, sometimes objectively. Yes, nobody would deny that there are serious problems with security, including personal security. But all of this kind of distortion of political discourse, degradation of political culture, I think is in Israel, it is facilitated by something that I think does not exist in most other places, and that is an electoral system that privileges illiberal forces. And by that, I mean a system of proportional representation, which results in disproportionate influence for relatively small forces that have disproportional influence because of narrow margins of victory in electoral outcomes. And that in particular, I'm referring to the religious parties. Now, those of you, I'm sure many of you already are familiar with the electoral system in Israel, and you probably know that historically it was not adopted because of any intrinsic superiority, nothing particularly democratic about it. It was simply the result of the necessity of a non-territorial reality. Zionist politics preceded Israeli politics, and they were developed in a reality in which there was no territorial base for organizing parties. So instead it was for organizing elections. So instead they were carried out on a proportional basis. And they have been perpetuated by the fact that in Israel now, the system can only be changed with the consent of those who benefit most from it, which is really almost a non sequitur. Now, I think the only possible reason for or basis for any kind of optimism of getting out from what appears to be a kind of a permanent trap is that there is still a close balance between opposing camps, liberal and illiberal forces in Israel. However, the trend lines are not encouraging because of the way the system has evolved, particularly the result of recent elections and recent coalitions. Illiberalism as an ideological system has been reinforced in the education system, is being reinforced through selective enforcement of laws by the police department, by the police forces, even rearing its head in the army, whereas you know the Judge Advocate General's department in the army has come under attack by right-wing politicians. And therefore, the future trend line is not encouraging. Except, and therefore, when one thinks of a practical way out of this, and most people are desperate to look for some practical way out of it, I think the only possible basis for a way out of it is by somehow disaggregating the different blocks that make up the illiberal camp. Now, there's really only one, I think, only one wedge issue that could allow the forces of liberal democracy to somehow shift the balance in their favor. And that is by setting some parts of the illiberal camp against other parts of the illiberal camp, and particularly, I mean, the religious parties. Because one of the few things that resonates in the secular nationalist movement is resentment at the privileged position of the religious parties, both in terms of the economic benefits that they receive, and particularly because in terms of their exemption from military conscription, one of the few things that liberal and illiberal secular forces share. Now, the parties in the current political constellation that have come out strongly in favor of a revamping of that system have so far fudged their message because they have also adopted positions that alienate members of the illiberal coalition on other issues. I really don't know how they're going to pitch their campaigns in what looks like an imminent election. I don't know how imminent. Lots of speculation about whether it will be before the summer, after the summer. In any case, we are already in a pre-election mode. And assuming that it's not somehow postponed or canceled on grounds of national security emergency, that election, this upcoming election, will be critical in determining the future course of democracy in Israel. I don't think that's an exaggeration or an overstatement. If one result will, I think, stop the trend line that we've seen in recent years towards a more authoritarian political culture. Another result, an opposite result, will put a stop to that and perhaps even reverse it. Frankly, right now, from any of the evidence that's available, and there is not a lot, the result is still indeterminate. And a lot of it will depend on not just on what Israeli politicians do, but also what the American president does in the weeks and months to come. I think I'm going to stop here, David, and throw it open to discussion.
Mark, thank you. Thank you so very much. Lots of questions, and certainly some when when I think about the comparison between what you just said and what I read in your article that you wrote while you were a visiting scholar in Berlin. We'll get back to that, but first, let me invite my colleagues on the panel, and both John and Norm have put up their hands. John, I saw you first, please, and then I'll turn to Norm.
Thanks very much, Mark. Everything you said resonates with me, and I, I guess we see the world in similar ways because we read and listen to similar media, and probably think that our media is the right media and the other media isn't. But nonetheless, the polls, the polls that I have been sort of watching still suggest that Bibi and company are at about 52 seats. Likud has the largest number. Put them together, Smotrich doesn't get in, around 52. And frankly, it hasn't changed that much. It didn't, go up or down that much with Iran, with the war there. Okay, so let's say there's 52. The Arabs seem to have united. Meretz and Labor have united. And I know that only Yair Golan is the only politician that seems to have said he would work with the Arabs. I assume that's going to change if the only way to defeat Bibi is to work with the Arabs, but I don't know that. My question is, why are Israelis so afraid that Bibi is going to pull it off again? Is it because he's always done it? Is it because I'm misreading the numbers? Is it because Bennett won't work with the Arabs, and you'll end up with Bibi being asked first to form a government? What's your take on this? Why is my sister who lives up north so afraid that Bibi's going to win again, and your prediction of the end of liberal democracy in Israel is going to turn out to be the case?
David, what's the format? Do I respond
Please. Yes.
time or?
No, you go ahead and respond. We're into
Okay.
a conversation, and
All
we
right.
invite others who are listening to write into the Q&A with
Okay.
questions as well. So why don't you respond to this, Mark?
Well, look, first of all, a lot of these polls are indeterminate. We don't know what the political reality will be at the time the election is held, if it's held. There are a lot of imponderables. We don't know, for example, if Bibi will persuade Ben-Gvir and Smotrich to go together again as he did last time, precisely out of fear that Smotrich's votes will go down the drain because by himself he doesn't pass the electoral threshold, which is 3.5%. If he does persuade them to go together again, then Ben-Gvir, instead of having whatever he has now, 6, 7, 8, could get another 3 or 4, at least. And that could change the calculation. Secondly, we don't know. We know that Bibi is a past master at manipulating the political environment just before elections take place. And it's entirely possible that something will happen which will again work to his favor. Now, even now, the polls show that Likud is the largest party. And the polls show even more convincingly that a majority of voters think he is more appropriate candidate for prime minister than anybody else. Now, the electoral system is such, or the political system is such, that the president is required to give the first chance at forming a government not to the head of the largest party, but to the one he judges to be most likely able to put together a majority coalition. There's a lot of uncertainty there, a lot of subjectivity there. But if he's the largest, if Bibi is the head of the largest party, even if he doesn't have 61 obvious coalition partners, he's going to be able, Herzog or whoever's president, I suppose it'll be Herzog, will be entirely justified in saying, all right, you can have first crack at it because you're the head of the largest party. And you've got, if I remember correctly, 3 weeks to try to do something. You can do a lot in 3 weeks with all kinds of political promises, inducements, what have you. Look, people still remember what happened in 1996. It was a traumatic experience for a lot of people, especially people who lived in Tel Aviv. They went to bed with all the polls showing Shimon Peres leading. They woke up the next morning with Bibi elected prime minister. And there's
The same thing happened with Tzipi and Bibi when he decided that all the Arabs were all the Arabs in Israel were.
Look, Tzipi could have, I think she could have put together a coalition if she had been willing to pay all of the extortionate demands that the religious parties demanded that Bibi was willing to. Because she had first crack at it, but she didn't do it. But anyway, look, we all tell these jokes about this apocryphal matron from Tel Aviv, from Ramat Aviv, actually, who woke up the next morning and said, I don't understand how it can happen. All my neighbors and friends voted for Shimon Peres. Well, Ramat Aviv, the Tel Aviv, the Herzliya, the television studios, and Haaretz are not necessarily the bulk of the electorate.
Norm, you're on mute.
Mark, whenever I look at the Israeli budget, my head explodes when I see how much goes to the Haredi community. I think about $2 billion is a number. And I think they were given some more money last week, another couple hundred million.
Yes. Yeah.
Talk about that whole budget and why it's been so lopsided. And, you know, like I say, my head explodes when I see that kind of money. And it must be, of course, worse for everybody else in Israel. So could you talk about that budgeting process and why it gets so much money? Or is it, do you have an insight into that at all?
Well, I don't think I have any particular insight into it. It's just arithmetic, Norm. Bibi doesn't have a government without the Haredi parties, and they are the only ones who have a credible threat of defecting because and bringing about a new election, because they are almost the only ones who are assured of doing as well in the next election as they did in the last election. That's because politics, a lot of politics has been, not just in Israel, a lot of politics has become identity politics. I mean, there are groups, especially the Haredim, who vote based on who they are. And there are a lot of other people who also vote based on who they are, rather than on what one would think is their objective interest. Now, Labor Party politicians for decades have been trying to persuade voters in less advantaged areas in the periphery and all the rest that the Likud party is giving their money to Haredim and settlers, and therefore taking it away from them, which may be true objectively, but it doesn't seem to persuade a whole lot of voters to switch, to vote differently than the way they did the last time or the way their parents did the time before that. So they, Bibi and Smotrich just keep paying off the Haredim, promising and sometimes delivering to pay them money so that they will not vote against the government.
But Mark, would they already go anywhere else if they weren't bribed?
No, I don't. Look, I don't know. I've often had trouble understanding
It's
why
the
their threats are
bribery.
being.
It's the
Exactly.
bribery of the last budget, 300 million,
Yes.
when they're already been in power for so long. I don't understand bribing somebody who's going to join you anyways.
Well, that's what I sometimes have a little trouble understanding, why the threats are taken as seriously as they are if there's no credible alternative. Now, I don't know if there's a credible alternative. I think there may be some people in other parties who are saying to themselves, we're not going to make the same mistake that Tzipi Livni made. She could have been prime minister and she could have formed a government if she had just given the Haredim a few $100 million.
Yeah, it's that simple, eh?
It's not quite that simple. Look, there are some signs of discontent, even in the Likud ranks, with certain kinds of socioeconomic preferences of government leaders. We know that it's not just the money. We know that the business about exemption from conscription is something that really bothers a lot of people who are otherwise aligned with the nationalist side of the camp. We also know that, last week we had the first defeat in the Knesset of the government that I can remember, just a couple of days ago. It wasn't on this issue, it was on a different issue that the finance minister wanted to raise the exemption on import tax from direct purchases abroad, Amazon and whatever, AliExpress, wanted to raise the exemption from $75 to $150. And there was a huge wave of protest. By whom? By small shopkeepers in Israel who thought it was going to hurt them. They happened to be a major constituency of the Likud party. So there are all kinds of contradictions in those weird coalitions, and it's not entirely certain how they will always play out.
Thanks. I'll let others speak. Yeah.
Yeah. Shai.
Well, first, thank you very much for the talk. It was very interesting. As someone who stayed awake in 1996 and saw the sweep, that's something that you always remember. And I think that one thing that maybe you can emphasize more on that is that Bibi has the ability to go the extra step. I mean, maybe Tzipi Livni is a good example. She didn't do that. And to do certain things that other people would not do. He would not stay in power for so long if he didn't have this ability to do things in that way. And really, even within the Likud, when you see some people that you would think, well, they have independence, they don't care about Bibi, like Nir Barkat, who is independently wealthy, doesn't need anyone, has the business connections to get the business community with him. They don't stand up to Bibi. They just do whatever Bibi says. You have other people like Avi Dichter. So I was interested to hear what you think about this also in like not just, uh, whether there will be a coalition outside of Netanyahu and Likud, whether it's the possibility that someone in the Likud immediately before, immediately after the election would say, okay, we had enough of Bibi. We are separating and going elsewhere because it doesn't make sense. And the second thing is, what do you think about the army becoming, I don't know if it's more religious, but definitely more messianic? It's just a lot of influence coming from the Orthodox, not those who don't serve, obviously, but the Kippot Rugot into the army, not necessarily reflecting liberal way of thinking and its impact on Israeli society going forward.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me try briefly to address the first question. It's true that you don't see many signs of independence among Likud leadership, willingness to stand up to Bibi about anything. I think all that is a result of what the undemocratic consequences of the democratization of party politics. Likud is always patting itself on the back as being the most democratic of political parties in Israel because it's the only one, well, the only major party that has really open primaries before elections, and therefore party activists are the ones who determine who gets on the Knesset list. And of course, because of the system, the higher up you are on the Knesset list, the better your chance of getting elected. Now, it so happens, of course, that as in most places, the party activists are more, how should I say, ideologically committed than the general run of party voters, just as party voters are more ideologically committed than the general population. That seems to be an iron law of politics, not just in Israel, almost anywhere. I think we may have something similar in the opposite direction in the Democratic Party in the United States now. Anyway, the consequence of that is that most politicians in Likud know that if they anger the base, their own political standing will be undermined. Not only will the prospects for getting to higher and higher office be undermined, they may not even be returned after the next election. So they're just very reluctant to defy Bibi because, as you say, he has the ability to convert his lack of principle into the appearance of commitment to principle. All right? In that sense, you've got to give him credit. He's a very, very effective politician. As far as the army is concerned, yes, look, people, the Army High Command and the other security agencies as well, the top leadership in the security agencies and the army don't necessarily see eye to eye, don't have the same worldview as the political leadership in Israel. They're I don't know. I've heard Likud leaders complaining that every time somebody gets high up in the Mossad or in the Shabak, they become a leftist. Maybe that's a reflection of their perception of reality or what real situation demands. In any case, it's also true, by and large, not completely, but by and large, with the upper command of the army. But you are right. Over the last couple of decades, there has been a perceptible shift in the social basis of the officer class, which, well, in ancient history, it was all kibbutznikim. And now more and more of them are coming either from towns in the periphery, where Army career serves as a form of upward social mobility, or from the settlements. And more junior officers, mid-grade, field grade officers are settlers. Now they're making their way over the course of time into higher and higher ranks all the time. And especially when you get to the level where political considerations figure in appointments, as they do in things like head of the leadership of the Shabak, for example, or appointments to the general staff in the Army. That's increasingly making itself felt in the Army. Up until recently, the joke was that unlike most countries, Israel is the only country whose democracy might be saved by a military coup. I don't even know if things continue as they have into the future, if even that would be possible anymore.
Mark, thank you. And Mark Anshin, to you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Mark, for your analysis. I wanted to ask you about current events and the impact that they have on the mindset of the Israeli electorate, and particularly the current situation with Iran and the potential. The U.S. military has already been landing tanker planes and all sorts of other military assets into Ben Gurion Airport in the last few days. What impact does the threat of a military conflict with Iran have on the whole calculus of what you've been talking about?
Well, first of all, like everybody else, I haven't got a clue what's going to happen, and I'm not even sure Donald Trump does right now. But I think as a general rule, one can say that whenever there is heightened security tension, there is a tendency to rally around the flag, suppress political dissent, suppress political opposition, because there's greater vulnerability to the accusation that you are, by opposing the government, you're providing aid and comfort to the enemy. And that's a political card that this government in particular has played very skillfully, to the point where the virtue of national unity has sometimes been perceived as a threat to proper democracy. Look, on every security issue, not just Iran, it is possible, and particularly in Gaza, it is possible to make a reasoned argument that it is government perversion or incompetence that has been responsible for making what is admittedly a bad situation even worse, rather than making it better. And I haven't heard that argument made about Iran. I don't think it will be. But unless and until this crisis passes one way or another, ordinary politics gets put on hold for a while. That's all I can think to say about this issue.
So,
there is one point. It's not so much just about Iran, but about the general sense of crisis as a result of October 7th. Look, there was a lot of criticism almost from the beginning about how the government was responsible for the outbreak of the crisis, for the management of the crisis, for the inability to pursue it, to prosecute the war intelligently and bring it to a satisfactory conclusion. And the government argued fairly persuasively, look, we're in the middle of a crisis, which is almost always true, and therefore you shouldn't undermine unity while there's a serious security crisis going on. And you don't, to put it crudely, don't change horses in midstream. Now and that argument somehow resonates and it appeals to people, especially to large numbers of, I don't know what to call them, less historically minded voters. Nobody bothers to remind people that the Brits changed their prime minister in the middle of World War I. The French changed their prime minister in the middle of World War I. The British changed their prime minister after the year of World War II. People do it all the time. The Americans had elections in 1942 and 1944. This goes on all the time. For some reason, the argument only resonates so strongly in Israel and in authoritarian or illiberal democracies. I mean, we know very well how Putin is exploiting this in Russia while the war goes on in Ukraine.
Mark, in the article that you sent us and that we distributed, you focus very much on the convergence between Israel and the United States, and
Right.
suggested that that convergence was starting to fray because when you wrote that article, the U.S. seemed to be with Trump in his first administration
Right.
moving towards illiberal democracy, and you saw Israel still being solidly within the liberal democratic camp. Um, the convergence today, one could reasonably argue, is that they are both converging towards illiberal a democracy. Uh, if for a moment we accept that, based on whatever evidence that we currently have, what do you see the implications for Israeli security? And I guess more in the larger question, the issue of peace in the region. I mean, if this convergence between Israel and United States on a strengthening of illiberal democracy
Mm-hmm.
going to continue, what does it say for not Only Israel U.S. foreign policy and relations, but the implications for the opportunities to make some degree of progress on peace and stability and security more widely.
Wow. Well, first of all, I'm very hesitant to give long-term projections
I
about the
know,
course
I
of,
understand.
And if I try to recollect what my thinking was in 2019 when I wrote that, I thought that Trump then was at the end of his rope, and I thought it was Israel that was moving towards a more authoritarian direction, and that the real danger of divergence was because the United States would move away from that. And I thought it was a problem, and I still think it's a problem. I think the situation is more or less similar now. I think my gut feeling is that Trumpism has peaked, but anyway, in the United States. I think that any kind of divergence is potentially dangerous for Israel because, notwithstanding the argument that American Israeli, productive, positive American Israeli ties are grounded in mutual interests, I've always believed that it was at least as much a function of shared values. And if there's a divergence in that, in those values, it will be harder to sustain a productive U.S.-Israeli relationship.
Yeah, you say that very clearly in your article.
Yeah, and I'm still very much concerned about that. I think I mean, in darkest days, I think that Biden may be the last pro-Israel Democratic president the United States has for the foreseeable future, anyway. And I don't even want to imagine what kind of impact it would have on the relationship if Bibi stays prime minister and the US has a president like Gavin Newsom or somebody like that. Anyway, uh, what the effect of that is on peace, look, I'm not sure that that's a critical variable.
Mm.
After all, there are other elements involved in that equation as well. And I think mostly the American role on that issue is, I wouldn't want to say marginal, but I wouldn't argue that it's as critical as many people seem to think it is. I think it's much more a direct function of bilateral Israeli-Palestinian relations. And there's nothing on either side of that equation that, to my mind, points in a positive direction. I mean, Shimon Peres couldn't make peace with the Palestinians, and Ehud Barak couldn't make peace with the Palestinians, and Rabin couldn't. And it's not just the right wingers who frustrate peace with the Palestinians.
So let me push you a little further on drawing from your previous background in strategic and security studies in the region. There's some interesting research that's been ongoing, basically asking a question about why do all these secular peace initiatives that we've been living with for the last 30 years seem to intensify rather than diminish religious political mobilization? So that's a question that you may
In
not be
Israel, you mean?
in Israel, but elsewhere in the region. So when the Palestinians and the Israelis, or even in the putative efforts in the Abraham Accords process and elsewhere, it's state authorities, it's secular authorities in a sense, that are in the forefront of trying to improve interstate relations. And yet, as these secular or administrative forces do this, we see the growing strength and the mobilization of religious forces, the politicization of Islam and its intrusion, whether in states or in non-state actors, the politicization and the increasing power of the Haredi and others. So I guess what I'm trying to tease out is the extent to which the trend line in Israel, for example, um, is increasingly liberal. That would suggest that there is less and less likelihood there's going to be a compromise possible if right wing and religious and traditional authorities who are so committed to aspects of not only religion but the sacredness of land are involved in negotiations, the extent to which they exist, that
Yeah.
the compromise is not possible. You can take Bill Zartman's idea of a herding stalemate, and it's not going
Yeah.
to work because religious extremists aren't hurt by this. They're rather reinvigorated by the challenge. So the trend line would suggest that those of us who are on the secular side of believing in liberal forces and the creation of opportunities for compromise and peace are being outmaneuvered.
Well, David, I started with a kind of a full disclosure, and I have another confession to make. I've become something of an apostate about on the belief that political scientists can say anything intelligent about the particular about patterns of regularity, long-term trends, what have you. I think that the science of political science is much more an aspiration than a reality. And now you're raising issues so it's so immensely complicated that I'm not sure one can even, I at least, can even figure out the chain or the direction of causation. I don't know if frustrated peace efforts result in more extreme religiosity or if it's the other way around. Um, I don't know, for example, why Israel got along very well with Iran under the Shah, and only after the Islamic Revolution did Iran become a mortal enemy of Israel, which
Mhm.
had nothing to do. There was already peace between Israel and Iran. It wasn't a reaction to anything about Israel or Iranian-Israeli relations. So I think that, the intensification of religiosity in many parts of the world, but particularly, I think, in Muslim countries where it's really believed. I mean, there are signs of religiosity in a lot of other places as well, but in Russia, for example, I think it's mostly cynical instrumentality of the
Sure.
government. I don't know how much they really believe it. In the Muslim world, it seems that people really believe it. I don't know what the explanation for that is. I think it's, you can say it's grand. It's a response to the grand failure of the experiment in modernization in the Islamic world, and it's not, I think, the result of the failure of peace efforts with Israel. Now, why is it happening in Israel? I don't know. I think, look, in the large, and why is it only happening in Israel and not among? Well, maybe it's happening among Jews elsewhere in the world as well. In the grand scheme of things, I think, the only great generalization you can make that's fairly persuasive in my view is that Marx had it wrong. And it's not something that's passing away. I mean, it may be the opiate of the masses, but it's something that the masses cannot wean themselves away from.
Okay. More later. Let's turn to John.
Thanks. Just following up on that very briefly. Christian evangelicism in the United States,
Right.
also in Latin America. It
Yes.
seems that, in fact, people are turning either to religion or to populism or to both when
Yeah.
all of this change that's happening in the world seems to be affecting them negatively and they can't figure it out. So, they're looking for the easy answers, not the nuance. But leaving that, going back to Israel, US, any views? I know you don't have any inside information, but the whole issue of a pardon and what Israelis, how they would react if Herzog ended up giving Bibi a pardon, without him admitting guilt or without him agreeing to leave politics, et cetera, et cetera. What's your sense of that, and what's your sense of Herzog, who, from my position, has become a massive disappointment from the labor leader and minister of education that I knew when I was serving there?
Yeah. Look, John, I never know what to believe anymore with what I read and what I hear. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff out there that really kind of sometimes just boggles the mind. Uh, Reports about secret deals between Herzog and Bibi that got Herzog elected president in the first place. I don't really know. I don't have any inside information. If I did, I couldn't tell you anyway. Uh, but I don't understand. I have the suspicion. I have the suspicion that if it were to happen, I don't know if it will. If it were to happen, it would provoke. Let me back up. I'm sure the division of opinion on that issue is more or less reflective of division of political opinion in general in the country.
Okay.
But if it were to happen, I think it would provoke a massive constitutional crisis in this country because my sense is that pardon can only be given can't be given preemptively. It's got to be given to somebody who's already been tried and convicted and expresses contrition and requests a pardon. And if it's given preemptively in order just to cancel the trial, I'm almost certain that the Supreme Court or the High Court of Justice will find it illegal. And then the political system as currently constituted will tell the Supreme Court to go take a leap. And I can't imagine anything posing a more direct threat to the only real separation of powers that sustains democracy in Israel than that kind of thing. I mean, there's no real separation between the executive and the legislature. There isn't. Only the judiciary provides some kind of counterbalance to the executive right now, even an executive with really a hair-thin majority in government. So I'm very much afraid. And I mean, I don't know Bougie personally. I met him once or twice. I don't know what kind of character he is, and I don't know what forces are at work. You're right. His comments so far, public comments at least, haven't inspired all that much confidence. But who knows? Sometimes good things come in small packages.
Yeah, I guess the only thing to note is that there was a pardon given to the Shin Bet officers on national security reasons before there was actually a trial, etc. That was the only time that I don't know how many pardons have been given in Israel, period, but that was a case where allegedly national security reasons were raised to even pardon the person before he was tried. But and
Yeah.
Bibi could, of course, raise national security. You know, I'm the prime minister during a war with Iran, and that because that's what he did with Gaza. But
Okay, look, John, you're right. There is that precedent. And you're also right that Bibi is very good at invoking national security for anything that has to do with anything connected with him or his wife or his children or anything else. But
yeah,
maybe that's the kind of precedent that might not provoke such a crisis, because after the people in the Shin Bet were pardoned and the head of the Shin Bet resigned and slunk off into obscurity in disgrace, that's something that might pass the smell test. Okay. And if the deal is a pardon for Bibi in return for his resignation from politics and go off to live in Miami with his kid, that might work. But if it's just, cancel the trial and everything else goes on as before, I don't see how how a true crisis could be avoided.
thank you.
Shai.
Thank you. Actually, just one anecdote on the previous instance of the only instance of pardon. The person who gave the pardon is the father of the current president. So it's the first Herzog president who gave the pardon, and then it went to the Supreme Court, and all the rest is history. And you mentioned Mark Astaine, Yossi Genosar, one of the people who were pardoned, tried to get a position, I think, as a general manager of one of the offices in the Israeli cabinet.
Right.
And he was denied because of the pardon, because they said not enough time has passed. It was, I think, 15 or 10 years after the pardon. You
Right.
cannot get the position because you're involved with this type of situation.
Well, that's true. But if I'm not mistaken, the head of the Shabak at the time was Shalom, and
Yeah,
he also he had to leave immediately.
he disappeared altogether.
Disappeared completely.
Yes, yes. My question is different direction. We have the extreme on both sides. We have a lot of number crunching, trying to get to the 61 necessary. There are questions whether the running together of all the Arab parties mean anything for future coalition, and Mansour Abbas said it's not. It's just a facility to get as much votes as possible, but there's no commitment going forward because really they don't have anything in common. There's also a question that puzzles me, and that's the Einat Wilf question. She's trying to run.
Yeah.
She said that if she's not going to get um, the minimum required to be elected
Yeah.
before the last day of registering the list for vote, she's
Right.
going to retire and not run and join an existing um, party or a list that runs.
Right.
Do you see any consolation that the not necessarily what she, her specifically, but what she stands for, i.e., the Palestinians really do not want peace at the moment, can get traction to generate some sort of, I don't know, Eisenkot led or someone else led body that would change the way that um, the election looked like today and basically take a lot of votes from the Likud, which is basically a big question.
Yeah. Look, I don't really follow all all the maneuvers of the minor parties, never mind individuals. I guess, it's significant for them because if they manage to get in as a small party, they have a better chance of becoming part of a coalition and getting a cabinet position and who knows what, ministerial office, driver, all the rest of that. My sense is that the bigger question is to take us back to the subject of this meeting. I think there are two big issues in the political crisis of Israel. One of the big issues is, the Palestinian question, relation to the territories, the rest of that. And the other big issue is the issue of governance and whether, in fact, there is such a thing as citizen equality in Israel in terms of both obligations and rights. From what my admittedly amateurish understanding of Israel's political culture, I don't believe that opposition can fight a successful war on two fronts at the same time. And I think that my sense is that if they try to wage a war both on governments, I mean a war by war, I mean a political campaign, both on governments and on the Palestinian issue at the same time, they will alienate enough people to make it impossible to win an election. Now, my understanding of the Palestinian issue is that there are lots of things that ought to be done immediately. Most importantly might be the kind of the imposition of law and order in the territories right now, which the government has basically abdicated. But the big macro question of peaceful regulation of future relations between Israel and Palestinians, that's something that can be put on hold for, I think, for a year or two, if the other issue is sorted out. So if opposition elements focus their attention on saying, we want to establish the rule of constitution in Israel first, and then we'll leave foreign and defense policy till later, they might have a better chance. And by that, I mean the Constitution. I mean the basic laws which are already on the books. You know enough about constitutions to know that they don't all have to be single written documents the way they are in the United States. Canada and Britain also have constitutions which are based on basic laws, which are the foundations of government. Israel has those as well, but they're just ignored. They're not implemented. I think that a party which focused its attention on that would resonate enough to have a chance to form a government, establish itself, reestablish the priority of law, and then move to other issues afterwards.
Yeah, but those who I hear what you're saying, but those who would criticize that would say that in Israel you don't have the luxury of being focused on one thing. And if you just look back to 2023, the entire focus was on the judicial coup or judicial revolution, depending on how you want to phrase it. And we ended up with October 7th.
Yes, all right. I don't look. We all know about counterfactuals, and we all know it's really impossible to say anything convincing about counterfactuals except what your gut feeling is. And my gut feeling is, and has been for a long time, that even if we can't get a peace deal with the Palestinians, we could manage the relationship a lot better in the meantime in order to avoid the periodic eruption of crises the way they are now. And that's something that could happen even without a peace agreement.
So let me turn to a question that has been sent in by Barbara Landau, which follows from this in some ways. She asked, "What is the impact of the Jewish public of Israel's recent legislation to allow settlers and Jews to buy property in the West Bank and to restrict the power of Palestinians in Area A?"
Well, I know it's happened. I don't think people are paying very much attention to it here. I know it's getting some play in other places. It doesn't really
Doesn't resonate in Israeli
it
politics.
doesn't really resonate. I think it's if I understand it correctly, the intention is to register as state law, as state land, territory for which there is not a clear proof of ownership, which could be a large part of Area C, because of the history of landowning in the country, going back to Turkish times. I mean,
Mhm.
deeds were not all that well recorded or kept or what have you. Yeah, what Israel needs to do is maintain the fiction that there is still some possibility in the future of negotiating. Even if which basically means abstaining from formally annexing. As long as that's the case, it's, the possibility of negotiation remains open. And I think
But
the
you used the
impact
term
on,
fiction. You
pardon
said
me?
fiction. You said fiction of negotiation.
That's right. As long as you formally don't close off the possibilities of negotiation, you can sustain things more effectively or with less danger of upheaval than now. I mean, ideally, of course, we would say, okay, we're going to go talk to the Palestinians. We're going to get a deal. We're going to do division of the land, two-state solution, partition of the country. The way we've been talking about it basically since
Right.
Lord Peel came with his report in 1937.
Right.
I don't know if we'll ever get there. Um,
Well,
but I
you
think
and
that,
Nusabi wrote about
huh?
this many years ago. You and Nusabi wrote about this.
Yeah, well, I'm saying the British wrote about it in 1937. There's no great originality here. It's just the idea, the principle of the idea, that's all. As long as the principle of the idea is sustained, as long as it hasn't been closed off, and there are forces on both sides that just want to close it off and say, we're not talking about this stuff. It's ours. That's it.
Yeah.
But as long as there are people who say, all right, we haven't closed it yet, it's ours, but we're willing to compromise, we can talk about it, do a deal here, do a deal there, whatever. It sustains the possibility of some kind of positive interaction. Now, if I don't know how serious this recent innovation is. Sometimes the Likud government just likes to throw verbal red meat at some of its voters, at some of its base. And as far as I know, nothing has actually happened yet. It's just a draft law, first reading or second reading, I don't remember. And even if it does become law, it doesn't mean that actually any land has been sold to private ownership of Jews in that's claimed by Palestinians. There are other things that are more immediate and are worrying people more, like I don't know, arresting women who want to go pray at the wall, that kind of thing.
Les, and then John, and then we'll wind it up.
Thank you. Just you mentioned the topic actually that I wanted to bring up, and that is the wall, the Kotel, which is something that is on the minds of liberal Jews in the diaspora. I'm not sure
Right.
how much it is in the Jews, in Israel these days, of what happened last week in terms of at first the High Court telling the government to implement the 2016 agreement, providing egalitarian space and so on for all Jews, and then the government reacting by coming in with a law that says the only prayer or activities at the wall will be run by the rabbinate, run by the ultra Orthodox rabbinate.
Right.
So it's an issue that again is just coming up now, and I'm hoping that our membership and so on are aware of. But give us your view from that side in terms of that issue.
That's an issue. I'm sorry to say, I think it's an issue that resonates more among Jews in abroad than it does among people in Israel. Look, most of the Jews who are affiliated organizationally abroad are, affiliated with conservative or reform or egalitarian congregations. A lot of them aren't affiliated at all, but of the ones who are affiliated, there are people for whom this is an important issue. That's not really the case in Israel. There's a very small reform movement, a very small conservative movement, and otherwise, most Jews are either Orthodox or secular and don't really care about this issue at all. It's not so much an issue of religious authority as an issue of the rule of law, the authority of the High Court, and the ability and willingness of governments, as I say, to act in an authoritarian manner with a veneer of democracy, meaning, a majority vote in the legislature. I think it's just one more factor that's, as I say, another contributing factor to the undermining of the software of liberal democracy in Israel. And it's another of the long things on a fairly long list that will either be turned around if there is a political upheaval, or they will entrench themselves in an increasingly authoritarian country.
John?
I think there will be more, there would be more there might be some more responsiveness to the concerns of Jews abroad if they made their feelings felt more forcefully.
Okay. Is that a challenge out to us?
That's an invitation, but I'm not authorized to issue any invitations, but.
Right. Right. Okay.
So just going back to quote the occupation, I agree with you 100%. The anti-Bibi should focus on governance and not on the Palestinian issue, which doesn't resonate at all. I mean, the only party that's even talking about it is Yair Galan. So,
right.
100% agreement. Also, I can understand why this legislation doesn't resonate in Israel for the same reasons, frankly. But if you combine that legislation, E1, which effectively cuts the West Bank in half when the new settlements get built. The whole history of this government and the West Bank and the violence, and the fact that this legislation, while it doesn't seem to be able to do much and hasn't been passed, but if it's passed, it basically ends the idea that you're just there temporarily. I'm talking about internationally now. I don't care really what Israelis think but internationally, Israel is becoming a pariah. And I know Norm doesn't agree because the Modi visits and they're making military sales to the Greeks and the Cypriots and the economy's doing great. I am telling you, when I talk to Canadians, not necessarily Jews, people that used to support Israel down the line, that supported it in 67 and 73, in churches, in just the average Canadian, Israel is becoming a pariah. And it's not because the media is focusing on it, it's because you have a guy like Smotrich saying, we will never have a Palestinian state. You've got the American ambassador saying Palestinians don't even exist, that Israel should control from the river to the sea and beyond. And this is what normal Canadians are hearing about Israel now. And I agree 100% with you. Turn this around by bringing governance and liberal democracy back, because there's a million things Israel could do about the West Bank, and they could stop building settlements there. They could bring, as you said, rule of law. But anyways, it's serious abroad. And I'm not even talking about anti-Semitism and the views of our children. I'm just saying the views of the average Canadian are really turning against Israel.
Well, John, I don't know how I can respond to that. I mean, I know that essentially you're right, I think, and it's a question of kind of public awareness of this among Israelis. Now, the ones who are most vexed by how should I call it, by the growing alienation of Israel in certain publics in the West are the ones who most interact with those publics in the West. I mean, academics who don't get invited to international academic conferences anymore, or film directors whose films aren't invited to international film festivals anymore. They are aware of it and they understand it, but they're a small minority of the population. Most of the population, I'm sorry to say, maybe it's a class thing, I don't know. Most of the population either isn't aware or doesn't care because they're not affected by it directly. Maybe some businessmen are affected by it, and maybe some travel agents are affected by it, but the bulk of the population not directly affected by it. I think the only thing that would really affect the bulk of the population, would be if Israel were excluded from international soccer competitions or international basketball competitions, or if they weren't allowed to take their annual holiday in Greece or someplace like that. Otherwise, basically, the government is very effective in persuading large number of voters, saying, "Look, they've always hated us. They always will hate us. It doesn't matter what we do or what we don't do. It makes no difference." I don't know how you combat that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I don't either, but maybe a better government will not be quite so adamant about that point.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's a whole population out there in the world which is still able to distinguish between the government and the country.
Yes.
But maybe as time goes on, even that group shrinks. And at some point, it will affect everybody and not just the elites and the snobs and those who travel around the world and,
Mark, I think we're going to have you back after the election uh, and see what your thoughts are on trend lines and where are the key actors and the blocks and how this is going to move forward. I remember many years ago, uh, I had a seminar with Diskin, who was then a professor of political science at the Hebrew University, and
Mm,
he was talking about electoral politics. And someone, this was a long time ago now, and someone raised the issue of um, the electoral system in Israel. And Diskin's response was, "We have what we want. It's real politics that people get to express their views, and you can have small parties." But he said it in the context of where there was still a trend line that looked like Israel was an emerging liberal a democracy with a lot of dynamism and social opportunity.
that's right.
Um, I don't know what he would say now. So, but we will have to have you back so you can reflect on this and see where those trend lines may be taking us.
Well,
For
I hope I'm still free to speak my mind.
that, well, you can always visit us in Toronto and speak from.
Okay.
For those who are online still, let me remind you through the month of March, we have an Israel Dialogues every week session. Next week, we're looking at Israel and Somaliland, a new
Mm,
horizon in the Red Sea. And the week after, we're going to be focusing on Qatar and Israel and Qatar's role in Middle East politics. So I hope you'll join us. Mark, thank you so much.
my
Les,
pleasure.
I'm not sure if you want to say anything. So then, on behalf of all of us in Israel Dialogues and Holy Blossom that sponsors this, thanks, Mark, and thanks everyone who's joined us today.
Great.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.